Who is that guy or that girl from your office, and what did they do to earn that title? I'll start. So a guy at my work, let's call him Roger, claimed you can, quote, get high-octane racing fuel by mixing 89 octane and 93 octane gas in your tank. Roger told me on my first day here 7 years ago that if I wanted to know any good Asian massage parlors nearby, he'd recommend the quote-unquote good ones with the happy endings. First day at work. He used to watch girls from the Philippines on his desktop at work. Then he went over and married one, and now she lives here. She's half his age and probably less than half his size. He took a Filipino coworker to see his buddy's band at a local bar. Turns out it was a biker frequented by a lot of the same kind of Aryan Nation-style bikers. The coworker told me that there were signs extolling the virtues of white and that everyone was glaring at him the entire time he was in the bar. When he pointed it out, Roger just laughed and said, I come here all the time, it's no big deal. Roger snores through meetings. Roger at one time had some kind of narcolepsy or something and he would fall asleep in his cube. Coworkers frequently threw things at him to wake him up. The weird thing is, he's actually a pretty nice guy. If you got arrested or something and called him at 3 a.m. to come bail you out, he'd do it, even if he'd only met you once for like 10 minutes. He's very friendly and sociable, just really strange at times. 89 octane plus 93 octane equals 182 octane. Am I doing my maths right? Now that would be a really fast car, huh? Story 2. I used to work inside sales at an HVAC company just outside of Toronto. There was a guy there named, let's call him Stan. And Stan was money. He tried so hard to be social but didn't quite know what he was doing, which often led to hilarity. Here are some examples of Stan being Stan. Upon learning a coworker was Polish, he said, "You're a Polak?" Then told her every anti-Polish joke he knew. He genuinely thought she would find it funny, and he was laughing the whole time. After not getting a promotion after his review, there were no positions for him to move into, nor was he anywhere near qualified. He created a petition to have our sales manager fired and went around to everyone in each department and asked them to sign it. Nobody signed it except for him. My favorite was at a company barbecue. Stan and one of the guys from shipping decided to do sh**s. The barbecue was at the president of the company's house, so this was wildly inappropriate. After about 45 minutes, he was going around from person to person shouting, "Go G-Men!" To the guys, he was a New York Giants fan and the season just started, and asked the girls to dance with him. He then told a bad joke to the 65-year-old VP and laughed so hard at his own joke that he started drooling. I do miss that guy sometimes. He made work a hell of a lot more interesting. Another Stan story. Stan and I were at a coworker's place with a few other guys and were having some drinks and watching a hockey game. It was the second intermission and Stan was a wreck. He doesn't handle his smoke very well. He was making samosas in our coworker's oven and decided he wanted to make himself a Caesar. He took the cap off the Clamato, turned to talk to me about something, and while talking to me, started to shake the Clamato juice with the lid off. Juice everywhere, but he cleaned it all up and had a mound of paper towels on top of the stove. And then the oven dings, his samosas are ready. He opens the oven door, but needs to clear off the paper towels from the stovetop so he can put the cookie sheet down. He stood there, staring at the situation for well over a minute, totally confused as to how he was going to get out of this pickle. I gave him a plastic bag to put the dirty paper towels in so the stovetop would be cleaned off. Problem solved. "Good idea. Thanks, man," says Stan. Nope. Stan then used the plastic bag as an oven mitt and picked up the hot cookie sheet out of the oven with nothing but a thin plastic bag between his hand and the hot metal. The bag, of course, instantly melted to his hands, and he burned himself pretty bad, smashing the sheet against the wall. Samosas everywhere now. We had to take him to the hospital, but we were all way too hammered to drive, so we all walked 15 minutes to the ER. Story 3. That guy at my current company is John. John is a conspiracy theorist who believes that the anti-theft RFID things at the doors of Walmart are designed to scan your credit cards and the metal strip of money in your wallet to see how much money you have to spend. John talks about secret CIA trains that run in tunnels under the city. John used to work for a cell phone company and tells us stories of how he installed scanners on light poles on nearly every major road to scan for a unique identifier that all vehicles emit for government tracking purposes. John believes the building we work in has chemicals applied to the HVAC system, which is making us more compliant with government programs. And John will never use his ATM card to buy meals because he doesn't want the government to track what he eats. John calls a $20 bill a yuppie meal coupon. I actually thought that one was funny. Ice cream is called whip lard. Eating at Panda Express is, quote, eating an endangered species meal. And John once told me about his collection of different size rubber gloves he has at home. He has a pair that goes up to his shoulders for cleaning the bathroom. Sadly, John quit a few months ago. On the day he quit, he sat in his car in the parking garage for 4 hours before he worked up the confidence to call his boss on the phone and quit. He instructed that his desk be boxed up and sent to his home. No one has heard from John since. John also believed that all major leaders of the world belong to the same family tree. Also, our building has anti-earthquake devices attached to it so the building shakes gently every so often. John claimed that the shakes were the CIA shooting mind control beams up from their underground trains. John believes our secretary at the front desk keeps a log of when John entered and left the building. Most days, John would ride the train to work, and every so often he would say, "Better stay indoors, they're spraying again." Spraying mind control, that is. I forgot to mention that he made custom tinfoil hats that he used to sell on the web. Unfortunately, I don't have a link. He also made gesture hats with detachable bells so you could wash them without the bells getting rusty from the water. Yeah, every president of the United States of the great Americas except one is related, so maybe he's not so crazy after all. Story 4. My good friend Paul works in the warehouse at our company. He's gotten into every sort of trouble imaginable. He tipped a towering stack of construction materials over the back of our yard's wall. He slammed the forklift into one of our delivery trucks when he dozed off. He's gone to the wrong construction site 100 miles away from the intended delivery site. But he's a genuinely good-hearted guy, and the company had mercy on him. He's still with us. Tons of funny stories always coming out of the warehouse from this guy. The highlight? Paul's an Iron Maiden fan, and he's always singing while he works. Well, one day, Paul decides to sing a parody version of Caught Somewhere in Time with the clever lyrics of Caught with Shaft in Hand. So he's just belting these inappropriate lyrics out as he moseys over towards the will call counter. And who should walk in but one of the sales directors giving a tour of the warehouse to a new female salesperson. Paul rounds a corner, continuing the chorus with "Caught with a shaft in hand," and bumps into the sales director. He plays it off like nothing happened, shakes his hand and the hand of the new employee, who are both giving him odd looks. To add to the hilarity, when they finally depart, we notice his fly's been down the whole time. Story 5. I'm not even sure where to start. We have that family working in our warehouse. It's a mother and her son and daughter. The son was recently fired for reasons that I will get into in a moment. They are as white trash as you can possibly be. Think of all the stereotypes and you'll have thought of them. So here's the laundry list. The mother, married to a guy that has dementia and 13 stents in his heart. They have filed medical bankruptcy 3 times. More recently, her husband tried to end himself but ended up only hurting himself in the shoulder. She always wears t-shirts with sayings that she thinks are clever. To really put the icing on the white trash cake, she smokes Pall Malls. She and her children commute to work together, but every other month their car gets repossessed, so they end up getting a new vehicle. No one is sure how they pull that off with all the bankruptcies and other bad credit issues. She watches every reality show, wants to talk about them with anyone who will listen, and doesn't understand when you tell her that you don't watch whatever it is she's talking about. So You Think You Can Dance is a prime example. The daughter, she smoked through all 4 of her pregnancies, claiming that her mother smoked when she was pregnant with her and she turned out fine. She lives in a trailer but gets mad if you call it a trailer because it's on a permanent foundation. She has Tourette's-type head twitches and blinking things going on, kind of like Jose Canseco. Come to think of it, she sort of looks like Canseco. She has no neck, just a head that suddenly becomes shoulders. She's constantly broke but spends every available penny on sending her 2 daughters to beauty pageants and then makes everyone in the company look at the pageant photos. Surprisingly, they have actually won a few. I would hate to see what the rest of the competition look like, though. We know she has some sort of psychosis because she has to be medicated at all times. If not, she sees and hears things that aren't there. This has led to her hiding under her desk, screaming and crying. She also has some other medical condition that causes her to always be on her period. We know this because she makes us uncomfortable by talking about it all the time. Once, her husband showed up at our office, and while he was waiting for her, he told us that he had known how crazy she was. He would have never married her, let alone had kids. To boot, she has 4 dogs, one of which she claims is an attack dog that actually fended off a burglar. It was a very elaborate story that ended with the dog launching himself off of the couch and into the burglars. No one was apprehended, so if you see anyone with the telltale signs of dog attack, please notify the authorities. The son, he always has the worst gas known to man. He was inside of a shipping container unloading products with some of our other employees when he kept gassing, which has ultimately made them all disgusted. It was gassy. He had to miss a month of work due to a riding lawnmower accident. He lives in a trailer on his mom's property but doesn't have electricity, so they just run extension cords from her trailer. He had a boil on his arm that was believed to be a staph infection, and his mother lanced it with a kitchen utensil. It was disgusting. He had a habit of wrecking our forklift and one day drove it off the loading dock. The forks went into the asphalt about 10 inches, and we had to get a special wrecker to come pull it out. A short time after that, he backed into one of the support beams in the warehouse, knocking it completely out from under the roof. The beam was at least 30 feet long, and it's amazing that no one was injured. Sometimes I would find him sleeping, hidden behind pallets in our warehouse during work hours. Eventually, his own sister ratted him out for being hammered on the job all the time, which explained all the forklift mishaps. When confronted by his mother about the drinking, he went crazy. Other employees intervened and we called the cops. He took off on foot and was apprehended later that day, vowing to get even with all of us for calling the cops. His mom didn't want us to call them, but whatever. Needless to say, he doesn't work here anymore. And there's so much more, but those are just some of the highlights that I can think of off the top of my head. Story 6. At my last job, we had a couple. I'll go with the one story that translates best to type. So we'll call him Kurt, and if Kurt was straight, then he had everyone in the company fooled. No one cared, mind you. It's just an important detail to the story. He was regularly referred to as a witch. Kurt was the kind of guy that would pick a target and then very openly flirt with that guy for a while. It didn't matter how straight, married, or uninterested you were, Kurt was going to get his flirt on. When my one friend grew a goatee, Kurt went up to him and said something along the lines of, "Ooh, I like this," and stroked his face. Another time, my other friend was in the kitchen heating up his lunch when Kurt walked in. I was in hearing of the kitchen, so I heard this all going on. First, Kurt asks him to get his lunch from the fridge for him. Naturally, it's on the bottom shelf, and my friend, being the unconditionally nice person he is, obliged. I'm already laughing so hard at the blatant, stereotypical office situation, but then Kurt took it to a whole other level, proving he's a pro. Now he has to explain why he's unable to bend over and get his own lunch. It's because his jewels are swollen to the size of grapefruits. Kurt went on for no less than 5 minutes talking about how big and sensitive his jewels are. It was glorious. My poor friend is just too nice to just say, "Gross, dude," and walk away. So he's trying to walk away with lunch in hand without being a schmuck. By the time he got back to his cube, I had tears in my eyes and my face was red from trying not to laugh out loud. This has set the bar as the greatest thing I've seen in a professional environment. Story 7. That guy at our place was Pete. He was great. He was a chronic liar. And it got so bad we actually started writing down the things he said he did. To be fair, some of these things happened, but most are things he claims. First, Pete has a property empire consisting of 24 houses. Second, Pete will sell his houses in 10 years and make £1 million. Third, Pete is an airline pilot. Fourth, Pete used to be a courier and made £1,000 a week and retired due to stress. Fifth, Pete used to have a wireless ISP in the South. Sixth, he has a further 36 houses. Seventh, Pete once harmed someone and the police turned up and thanked him. Eighth, Pete used to have a Rover 600. The 1.8-liter engine was so powerful he would regularly win street races with it. It is now sat in a garage in Bristol for when he needs it. Ninth, Pete was a lorry driver. 10th, Pete is a volunteer custody inspector for the police. 11th, Pete now has 64 houses. 12th, Pete once threw one at someone, missed, damaged the wall, and knocked a brick out. 13th, some kid stole his scooter once, then he found them and did something to them. 14th, Pete now says he found them in the pub, bought them a drink, so they knew he knew. 15th, Pete spent 10 years as a DJ for Radio Bristol. 16th, Pete runs a webcam website. 17, he used to be Scott Mills' PA at Real Radio. 18th, Pete is an officially ordained priest. 19th, Pete has a Class 2 license for lorries. They are apparently very easy to turn. 20th, Pete belongs to martial arts clubs and has tournament training on Wednesday nights. 21, when there was a forum post about donation, Pete managed to end the thread with this gem, quote, "I'm not sure if I should go. The last time I went, they took half a pint and told me it was being thrown away as it was no good. So I haven't bothered since, and that was about 13 years ago. 22, Pete's wife was made redundant from the nursery she worked at, so Pete bought it. 23, Pete once came into work after his karate fight club championship in a tracksuit. 24, Pete grew up 5 doors down from Tony Robinson. 25, Pete told us the domain name for TNT, the delivery company, was about to expire. He said he nearly got it, but they renewed it before it expired. He said he would sell it back for £1 million. 26, we pointed out to Pete his trousers were falling down. Pete said it was because he had lost 4 stone in the 1.5 weeks but looked exactly the same. 27. On a night shift, he was talking all night about how he was going to London to visit his friend Lacey Turner from EastEnders. He even called her and was heard leaving a voicemail saying, "Hi, it's Pete. Lacey, love, I'll be there soon," etc. 28. On another night shift, Pete was talking about his wife and ended up talking about how they were splitting up because she couldn't please him. And 29. Without fail, Pete always downloads a terabyte of data a month. Story 8. Our guy only recently got fired. One of the conclusions we had eventually reached about him was that he was completely incapable of feeling empathy, which is not really the best person to have as your main customer support representative. But that was what he had been hired to be. He was mostly frightening in that position because he never stopped smiling or being cheerful, even if the customer was freaking out at him or he was bored out of his mind. This in itself doesn't call for alarm, but he was a strange dude. For example, on his second week in the office, he found out that there weren't any dentists that provide ozone therapists in our city. So he took 2 days off and drove to a nearby city in order to get his teeth ozoned. He would ask, "How was your weekend?" in the most interesting voice you could imagine, inflection perfect with Tobias Funk asking, "How are you?" You could tell, sure, with him bursting into laughter at every event that happened, no matter what it was. If you asked him how his weekend was, he would be extremely sure it was a great weekend, but then wouldn't be able to recall exactly what he did, ever. After a month of working there, he started complaining that our insurance company, which he couldn't receive benefits for until he had been there for 3 months, didn't cover his ozone therapy. He kept a steamer crock pot thing in the break room and steamed a mixture of carrots and spinach every single morning, which he would then eat out of a bowl at around 10 a.m. The smell was atrocious, and everyone complained about it the first day he did it until we found out someone was making that horrible smell on purpose. He called it borscht for unknown reasons, which our Russian salesman nearly flipped out every time the word came up. He was kind of dumb when it came to support as well. We have a support ticket system that handles all of our clients for all the different services we offer. He actually had copy-paste that he was putting into every single ticket with a lot of idiotic troubleshooting steps that didn't apply to 75% of our clientele. When someone called in to report a support center was down, he asked them to submit a support ticket about it. He, overall, was a bit of a know-it-all, being very good at selling clients things that they didn't need and would later complain they spent thousands of dollars on. By the time he was fired, clients would call in and immediately ask to be forwarded to sales, even for stupid support issues, just so they wouldn't have to talk to him. And he's not as bad as some people's that guy, but by the time he was fired, everyone in the office was being driven up the wall. Our number of support tickets submitted this past month are at 50% of what they were last year, after a steady increase for the rest of the year, and I'm fairly certain it's all his fault. Another thing that is completely inexcusable, we had, as I stated, a Russian salesperson. Let's say his name was Boris. And Boris had a bit of an accent but had lived in America for most of his life. He pronounced his name, or at least his name in this parallel example, Boris. Support guy insisted on being it Boris. We were all too polite to correct him, but he knew it was wrong. He knew it. Because once, by coincidence, I laughed at something on my computer just after the support guy said Boris. Immediately, the support guy says, "Oh, I pronounce it that way because that's the proper way to say it." Out of nowhere, he says this. And on the subject of Boris, support guy spelled his name Boris. No idea why. 2 R's. He was corrected every single time. "Sorry, I forgot." The support guy worked there for 7 months. 7 months of too many R's. And if so far you're getting a good chuckle or 2 or more out of this, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 9. I doubt anybody will see this as late as I am, but I feel compelled to share. Don't discount that guy too quickly. An old friend of mine used to share stories about a coworker that would always say and do wildly inappropriate things, much along the lines of the OPs as examples, and including picking food off said friend's plate in the break room, uninvited of course. My friend was nice to the guy anyway, despite the annoyances, and considered him a friend. Anyway, long story short, my friend passed away suddenly one day after he'd quit his job with that guy a while back. The guy was on his Facebook friends and ended up producing quite an outpouring of feelings and sympathy with the family and friends of the deceased. He would note every time he drove by my friend's old house or anything, and not obnoxiously, but in a very genuine and caring way. He was very kind and supportive to all of us that were grieving. He obviously was a very caring and friendly individual, just totally socially inept. The moral of the story? Some of those guys are just totally weird, but some are actually really nice people that just don't know how to interact well. Give them a chance and you might make an invaluable friend for life and death.
This guy was far more loyal than the trite, quote unquote, normal people my friend had worked with, some of whom made short and non sentimental remarks on his passing. That guy seemed to be the only one that was really, truly affected by it.
Story 10. Several jobs ago, we had a know it all guy who, no matter the context, had a story. This included the time when we were discussing with some Russian engineers what it meant to stand in a food line. Know it all guy tried to answer the question. We're all like, dude, when were you in a Russian food line? Shut up and let him answer. Favorite, though, had to be the discussion of where to go for lunch. The discussion included a couple of H-1B guys who were quite literally straight over from India. The idea of an Indian restaurant came up. The food at that place is no good, they said. Yes, it is, said Know It All Guy, who I think had been the one that suggested the place. Not really, no, they said in that, polite way and suggested other places. Know It All Guy dismisses other places. No, really, this place is like the closest to the real, authentic Indian food. Finally, I had enough and said, Know It All Guy, listen. These guys were just there a month ago. They lived there all their lives. When they say that something is just like mom used to make, they mean it. We're going to take their opinion on this one. Story 11. I used to work construction with a substance user named Randy. He was childhood friends of the owner and his co-owner brother, the both of whom did not have the heart to fire the guy. Besides nearly ending me and a coworker daily, there's this gem of a story. I had to pick him up for work every day, which meant a half-hour drive to his trailer, before an hour and a half drive in the other direction. Commuting this song for a construction gig means a waking up time of 4 a.m. So one day, I'm just too exhausted to drive and against my better judgment, let him drive from his place. His only stipulation was that we take his car. I fall asleep immediately, figuring if he got into an accident, I'd rather end in my sleep. I was woken up a few times by a few reckless turns, and by the end of the trip, I really regretted the decision, as it entailed a return trip with the madman. We finish our shift 8 hours later, get in the car, only to drive 5 minutes, before he spots a police cruiser behind him. Aw, man, don't do anything funny. Huh? Why? Just drive, it'll be fine. And then the lights and the siren fire up. Aw, man, I told you. Cop. License and registration? Randy. Well, officer, see, my hands are up and empty. I'm just gonna step out of the car because I don't have a license. Me. What? You said it was fine that you drove today. That implies that it's legal. Cop. Sir, tell your passenger to remain in the vehicle and step outside. 30 minutes later. Cop. Do you have a license, son? Me. Yes, sir. Is it all right that I drive this car home? Cop. It would be, but unfortunately it's not registered, so we're impounding it. Can you call someone to get you? After that, I had to wait 3 hours for my boss to even leave to come get me, plus the drive for him pickup, and then ride back down with him, totaled about 6 hours of me sitting at a bench in a podunk town in upstate New York, because I didn't even have the decency to have a bar for me to have a few drinks at. That's why he was that guy. Story 12. At my old job, there was a girl named Shelly. I'd been there for about a year and a half when she was hired, working as a keyholder assistant manager optician of a very small, 2 doctors, 2 opticians, 1 other employee, private optometry practice. The practice itself was owned by a husband and wife. The husband worked at the store I was in, while the wife had a store up in New York. She was allegedly a friend of the other employee, a kind of mousy Colombian girl who was sweet, if a bit naive and adverse to working. Initially, Shelly was kind of a schmuck, which was fine. Apparently, they'd hired her on as a manager or something, despite the fact that we didn't need one, and she was trying to throw her weight around. It was annoying, but, life goes on. She starts getting really close to the owner of the store, oftentimes going into the office and closing the door for quote-unquote meetings, which seem kind of shady. Because when you combine that sort of secrecy for the puppy eyes they were giving each other, it's obvious what's going on. From there, they got really touchy. We have cameras, not sure why they do that. And as she started taking money out of the register while the owner gave her permission. For a store pulling in maybe $800 a day, taking $100 to $200 of that money was pretty bad. We stopped getting commission around that time. She was also just really lazy and rude to the customers, so much so that we had a bunch of them who would refuse to see her. Giving discounts and good service to her friends is one thing, but charging everyone else like crazy to make up for it? No. After about 4 months of this, the owner's wife comes in and asks me point blank what's going on. I tell her it isn't my place, but, well, it is what it is. Apparently, the owner's wife finally called some of her old employees, and it turns out that Shelly runs this kind of scam all the time. She gets hired, gets cozy with someone in charge, and then cries for money and gifts, etc.
She got a bunch of clothes from another store this way and a BMW too, which kind of blew my mind. The next day, Shelly got fired because, and I quote, "I'm not paying you to do my husband." Story 13. Oh, sweet Jesus. This is probably going to end up buried, but I need to get it off my chest anyway. I used to work at a women's clothing store. One of my first shifts, I was closing with a young supervisor. She seemed okay until the manager left. Then she sat on the floor, took out her phone, and started texting people. Whatever, we weren't busy. After about 20 minutes of this, she suddenly stops texting, looks at me, and asks me if I'm, quote, okay with intimacy stuff. I didn't really know what she meant at first, so I just kind of shrugged and tried to keep myself busy. She asks me again, only the second time she actually elaborates and asks me if I'm okay with talking about intimacy. Once again, first time I've ever met her. Being the new girl, I didn't want to rock the boat, so I tell her that, yeah, intimacy talk doesn't bother me because it doesn't. Do I prefer to talk about it with close friends in a less of a work environment? Yeah, but whatever. Wrong move. As soon as I tell her I'm okay with that talk, she starts loudly talking about how she recently had intimacy with a friend of hers, and now she has chlamydia. This was her favorite topic of discussion for the next 4 weeks or so, her chlamydia. She made it totally common knowledge. She even told some of our customers, which two of us found out that one afternoon, when an older woman approached us and asked if we could help her instead because, quote, that girl over there won't stop talking about her disease. Story 14. We'll call my coworker from a few years ago, Ed. So Ed was a British man living in the US. He had pictures of the Bush family as well as a picture of the Queen in his cubicle. He was also a bodybuilder and ate a strict diet of small meals numerous times a day. He had a lot of his food pre-made and delivered to him, and he'd bring it into work. It was common to see Ed eating, and none of us really cared since we knew it was part of his overall workout regimen. He'd often microwave single potatoes, snacks, leftovers, etc. But then there was that day when Ed didn't know his fish had spoiled and he threw it into the microwave. The office smelled horrible for the rest of the day. There was also that one time he came over to my desk with a wounded face. He said he'd nicked himself while shaving and asked me to clean him up and bandage him. He brought alcohol prep pads and ointment and a Band-Aid. He also told me once that he wanted to have my babies, which was confusing because he was not straight. I tolerated all of this because I was lonely and had a crush on him that I didn't understand and never admitted until, well, now. Well, that wasn't the ending I expected. Not at all. Story 15. Oh man, don't even get me started. I can name a bunch. There was the boss's son who would always come to work for like 2 or 3 months before trying to launch a totally different career. He was all, I want to be a lawyer. And then suddenly, I want to be a politician. What a loon. And then the executive directly under the boss drank all the time, showed up to work hammered too. We all just kind of felt bad for him because his wife passed away and we all knew her. But he'd fly into these intoxicated rages sometimes, you know? Not the kind of thing you want to deal with on the job. But the worst of it was this one guy who we all thought was totally legit, did a great job for years and had loads of technical expertise. And then it turned out he was a total prejudice. He'd been acting strange and we all thought it was just because he'd had his leg treated recently. But he just lost it when the boss started integrating the workplace, said it wasn't right or it wasn't safe or something. Then he tried to harm the boss. Didn't work, he got caught and eventually got imprisoned. It was messed up. I tell you, some people just can't handle the pressure of working on a battle star. Story 16. I do believe I have a good one to share. New hire in the dev department. We shall call him Peter. Peter makes people uncomfortable. He's the kind of guy whose every action makes others uncomfortable. His jokes are entirely inappropriate and leave you feeling uncomfortable. We are not prudes by any stretch, but this guy just says the wrong things. This could be dealt with or ignored, but what happened on April 1st of this year caused me to lose any possible shred of respect for the man. So, 7:30 a.m., our early bird IT guy shows up, first in the office. 7:45 a.m., Peter shows up. 8:15 a.m., our lead architect shows up, notices things are amiss. List of pranks are as follows. Boss's chair is missing. Every desktop PC's Ethernet has been pulled. $200 worth of coffee is missing, purchased the day before. Pulled chains inside all 4 toilets are missing. Inside door handle of men's bathroom has been removed. And an infinite loop of, this door is locked, use other door signs on our 2 entrances. Now, first off, we have a pretty lax policy on working from home. You are permitted up to 2 days per week to work from home, and our devs regularly remote desktop into their machines. So pulling the Ethernet from every desktop machine was a pretty schmuck thing to do. Second, we didn't discover the inside door handle was missing until after our lead architect entered said bathroom and closed the door, locking himself in. He got a bit claustrophobic and was seconds away from breaking the door down before we managed to get it open. So the pranks really disrupted the office that day. By 10 a.m., emails have gone out requesting the person responsible please return the pull chains, door handle, coffee, and chair. The day goes on, no one admits to pulling the pranks. We are a very tight-knit group that has worked together for years. Peter is the only new guy at this time. No one has ever pulled a prank like this before. So we have motive and opportunity pointing to Peter being the culprit. He is directly confronted and denies it. And it's at this point that I and many others in the office lost all respect for Peter and he has never really recovered. I expect him to be gone within a few months. Oh, and the missing parts did eventually show up, one piece at a time, in and around various people's desks. And a desktop coffee maker was anonymously gifted to the lead architect with no note. Why can't the guy just admit to it and let us all move on? Story 17. Inside sales as well. Work with a guy with a few quirks. 1. Quoted Yoda in Yoda's voice to a ton of people who could care less about geek culture. Second, bragged about watching the Battlestar Galactica series something like 7 times. He shouted amateur to the VP of corporate sales at the Christmas party in response to part of the VP's speech where the show was mentioned, then kept talking about it at our table for 15 minutes. Third, brags about his wife, who he met online, who weighs 350 pounds easily, and once got red-faced angry when a photo of said woman went missing in a cubicle move. What kind of sick person would steal a photo of my wife? Yes, what a sick person indeed. 4. Shadowboxed every time BJJ got brought up. They look ridiculous. 5. Always overemphasized everything like he was an expert on everything. He was an expert at nothing. 6. I once flipped a Tootsie Roll pop upside down in a candy glass he had. The next day it was righted. I kept doing this for months. 7. He spouted the corporate message constantly, even after being caught dialing the time zone phone number 20 plus times a day to keep his dials up. He kept his job by brown-nosing hardcore. 8. He was fat, and his chair had so much dandruff on it that it looked like snow. 9. Turned 10-minute meetings into 40-minute meetings by yapping uselessly on things he couldn't change. Yeah, that guy. 10. Did I mention the Yoda thing? Yeah, sounds like the VP needs to watch more Battlestar and not embarrass himself, I guess. Is that the biggest deal right now? No. Story 18. About 6 years or so, my company hired a new engineer who, on paper, was absolutely amazing. His degree, his employment history, and his past project list of achievements was one of the most impressive I had ever seen. But holy moly was he weird. Here's a quick recap of the things I can remember. He frequently walked around the office during normal business hours with no shoes on, just his pink socks. Sometimes seen pulling up his shirt to wipe his mouth after eating or to blow his nose. The office had a pretty standard don't go crazy with hanging things on the walls policy. Now this guy happened to have the N cube of a row, so he had a full wall which he blanketed from floor to ceiling with pictures his kid drew in art class. So imagine a wall with about 120 8x11 finger paintings on it. Also, did I mention he glued them to the wall and it had to be repainted when they were removed? Would play pinball on his laptop during project meetings, sometimes getting tired and laying his face down on the keyboard to take a nap. Once showed up to an offsite meeting at 7 a.m. eating creamed spinach. Later that day, we all took a break at lunch to walk around the town we were in for 30 minutes or so. When we got back to the meeting, he wasn't with us even though he had been following us the entire time. 2 hours later, he came walking back in because he got lost. He said the reason he got separated from us was that he had seen some rose hips growing in one of the locals' yards, so he let himself in and proceeded to eat them. Eventually, we fired him for, I don't even remember, for being crazy, I guess. Story 19. Let me tell you about that guy at my office. I cannot make this guy up. He defied what I thought was possible in a person's behavior. We'll call him Pat. So let's get this out of the way. Pat wears sweaters with a monogram of his initials on the collar. Pat is older, probably in his late 50s or 60s, but dyes his hair a wretched shade of blonde. This contrasts grossly with his reddish, sunburned skin. He tans very poorly, but is out in the sun a lot due to the one hobby I know him to have, running. His music of choice in his office, classical, especially waltzes that sound like they were the soundtrack of the Third Reich. He rarely stays the entire length of meetings. He will just peace out halfway through and never come back. He has a pompous and overly disciplined demeanor. I cannot imagine Pat in a relaxed state. He is always hiding behind a wall of professionalism. He sits and walks perfectly straight, never slouching. When speaking, he uses each word carefully and enunciates everything with intent. He uses certain phrases over and over again, like, let's add this as an action item. That'll be just fine. And, well, to be perfectly frank, the latter is ironic because Pat is never frank. He is the epitome of elusiveness. Everything he says is a mystery because he has no idea what he's talking about, so he hides behind riddles of lies. If you were to walk into his office with a question about ketchup, you would leave not knowing what ketchup was anymore. One time, I was working on a deliverable to a customer, a data call response regarding an upcoming solicitation. I went around the company asking for assistance because it required more than the knowledge I had. I was making decent progress, but there were a couple of questions that people kept referring me to ask Pat about, since they fit his area of expertise. I went into his office with the questions in hand. It's his customer's deliverable, so I thought he would be concerned and interested to help. I let him know I'm nearly done and just need his help on a couple of questions. He responds with one word, no, and he stares at me unexpectedly. I have no idea how he thought I would respond. I was a bit flabbergasted and just said, okay, I guess I'll keep working on it then. And then I walked out. I've got a handful of stories similar to this. No one likes the guy. He is occasionally sharp, but for the most part fumbles and hides behind pseudo-intelligence. He is extremely self-conscious and concerned about his image at the company. Good thing he is retiring soon. Story 20. I used to know a guy who was that guy everywhere he went. He was fired from every job he has ever had, and because he would not stick to dress codes or because he's washing his hands all the time. He's a germaphobe, and his bosses didn't look kindly when he was in the bathroom every 15 minutes washing his hands, as his customer support phone was lit up with unanswered calls. He got some kind of a PC game for Christmas. A few months later, I asked him if it's any good. He said he hasn't tried it yet because he needs to upgrade his mouse. Me? What? Him. You can't play FPS with a normal mouse. You need a wireless mouse. Me? What? Him. Let's say you're playing the game, and all of a sudden, the mouse cord gets caught on something. What's going to happen? You're going to be defeated. I don't have the money to buy the wireless mouse I want right now. It's too expensive. Me? Did you at least install it and try it out? Him? No, I told you I don't have a wireless mouse. He is an over-the-top Republican who outright worships Fox News. When you come over, he has to show it to you and explain to you how it's quote-unquote fair and balanced, and how you should really watch it and learn something. One day after a discussion with him, me, let me get this straight. When the local government was run by Democrats, you were getting unemployment, government health care, and money for school because of some kind of a disability. You voted Republican, and they won in your town, and they pulled out all the government health programs leading you to lose disability, money, and health care, and it's Obama's fault? Do you realize he was trying to get people like you free health care? The thing you're complaining about, and you voted against it, and now you complain you don't have it? In his mind, he won the argument because he said that Obama is a prejudiced, and that soon all white people in the US will be locked up in camps. Right, but if you connect it with any of these stories, here's the next right thing to do is to keep watching more because YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.